Marvin, we'll start with you, and then we'll run it over to Andre, and then maybe people in the group can throw some stuff out. When I say high-performing team dynamics, like what have you done? What do you think? What have you learned that makes a high-performing team?
I think the word team has to come take a priority, and how you work together. High-performing teams work together well. Now, it's not only about the talent. You need talent. There's no doubt about it. But high-performing teams understand roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
If you took 5 of the best NBA players, it would be interesting how they played against the NBA championship team. The championship team plays together. They know each other. The all-stars may be a better talent. But when you talk about high performers, everyone has a role. Everyone has a responsibility. The coach has a role. The coach has a responsibility. The leader on the team, the captain, has a role, responsibility. All of that has to come together for it to work. And talent is a part of that, but the teamwork and acknowledging roles and responsibilities is important. If you translate that over to business, it's the same thing. You have processes and procedures, but you have teams that understand how to work together. And I think that's the critical part. It's the teamwork and working together and understanding roles and respecting those roles and responsibilities.
Yeah. We got Mr. Davis.
Oh, Marvin said so much. I'm not shocked, but I just don't, where do you take this dialogue now? Marvin said so much. I think for me, Marvin hit on a lot of great points. And folks that don't know me, I tease Marvin. Marvin's super smart and has been a leader for many years. And so, I think he's somehow paid by Lance to promote, but we'll get to that another time. But I think high-performing teams, what speaks to me is the safe issue, right? When you feel safe to communicate how you feel about a certain thing, and we talked last time about knowing your lane, knowing what you really do well, and it's up to the leader within that organization to help people know what they do well, discover what they do well, but creating a safe environment so that if I'm in a lane that I know I don't do well, I don't get penalized because I say, you know what, that's not really my skill set. This is my skill set. And then having that person put that person in the right position. There's a language around athletics about saying, know your bench. You have people that sometimes aren't performing well. It's up to you to say, well, is it the right position? Should they be there? Maybe quarterback's not the thing, or maybe forward's not their thing. Maybe they really are a center. Maybe they're a point guard. It's about moving the pieces around. And I think that's what I saw happen with The Last Dance is everyone knew what Dennis Rodman's role was. He certainly he wasn't a scorer, right? His job was get the ball, give it to somebody that can score, and repeat. So rinse 1, 2, 3, repeat. And so Phil knew that. Everyone on that team knew that. And so I think it's when people feel safe. You speak out, you feel comfortable. You're not penalized for speaking out. So you're safe. And when you're safe, when you feel safe in that environment, you're always going to give your input and know you're not going to be chastised for giving said input.
Yeah, I do think too, right? Like part of what makes them a high performing team, talk about it in sports, but I think it applies equally in business, right? You don't need 100 people to do the same role on a team, right? They didn't have 5 scorers. They had a scorer and a bunch of other people who could situationally score. I mean, I guess you could argue they have 2 if you want to argue that Scottie Pippen also was a scorer, but we found out later he was not the kind of guy who was going to carry a team scoring wise, right?
Right.
I think the same thing's true, right, in a business environment, right? I don't necessarily need everyone to be a revenue developer or a business development person, right? Like, Andre, you're the business development guru. We don't need all Andres. We need we may need a couple of Andres.
Yeah, there's no Andre. There's only one. You can't create that. You can't.
I walked right into that
that
one.
No.
I walked right into that one, Jason. But we need the other, but we also need the people behind the scenes who are more detail oriented, maybe, or who make sure that the trains run on time. We need the person that, and that maybe was Steve Kerr or Phil Jackson, right? We need all the different pieces so that a high performance team respects and values each of those talents equally. So Michael Jordan wasn't more important than Scottie Pippen or Dennis Rodman. His role was equally important, not more important.
Right. And I think you need a high level of communication and trust. Those two things are always going to be a part of a high performing. How well do we communicate? There are times when you're on the court and even in business, you don't have time to explain the whole thing. I just don't have the time. Scott, you know what I mean? And I look at you and Scott, I got you. Marvin, I got you. There needs to be a communication and there needs to be a trust. They talked about that. Can I trust you, Kerr, to knock down this thing? Paxson, when I pass you the ball, and I trust you to knock down the shot, you got to have that trust. And we talked about it last week. They missed one. So do I go back to them again? Yes. That's what trust is all about. And you kick it back to them again and they knock this one down. So you have to be a good communicating. To be high performing, you have to be a great communicating team. And you have to trust each other. You have to trust your teammates. You have to trust your colleagues that they're going to get it done on time and in the way that you need it done. So
yeah, the other piece I would jump in and say too, I've been fortunate in my career to be around some magnificent leaders right in our own backyard, right? And so the ones that I've engaged with have a tremendous amount of ownership. And what I mean by that, they're not afraid in front of their group to make an error and say, you know what, that was my error. I made a bad mistake. And what that does to an organizational structure, it allows, again, the safety net, being safe in an environment. It's okay to make a mistake. And really great leaders, they encourage people to make mistakes, right? Because we all know that's where the growth is, right? So we encourage that. When you find a dysfunctional team is when they're nervous. If I don't perform, they're anxious. They won't perform their best, because if I step out and do something really innovative and it doesn't work, there are repercussions for that. So they won't do that. So great leaders clear the way for you to make errors, obviously try something new. If it doesn't work, we'll pivot to something else. And they're always adapting and overcoming, and they're super flexible. The other, we can talk about even leaders like Jack Welch. That was punitive, right? They kind of cut their way to revenue. We can talk about a lot. That is not
10% every year. 10% every
100%,
year.
right? And so that's not what leadership is today. There's a local CEO that I'm really fond of. Both of you might know Tyler Notberg. Tyler Notberg is, and David knows him well too. But Tyler starts pre-COVID and now post-COVID. He starts every meeting in his leadership group asking, or sharing rather, this is what I'm struggling with. And then he opens up the door for the leadership, the team, to go, what are you guys struggling with? This is what my struggles are. Some are just not business. It's personal. It may be this. It may be mental. How do I get our team, whatever. And I think it creates a platform for other leaders to go, wow, I'm glad you said that, because I have the same struggle. Then now you have these leaders around a table that are sharing. And then what does that do as it permeates through the employees and some of the other folks, right? You start to create a really, really strong synergistic environment. So that's what I would add to that, but I'd be open to other dialogue too.
I kind of want to hear from Natalie. She wrote about this challenger personality, and I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are related to that, and have you seen that in the business world, and does it have the same effect?
Yeah, I think when I was watching through some of those episodes, it really stuck out to me of like, Jordan's kind of an a-hole, excuse my language, but like, here's my initial reaction, like, who would like this person? He's mean he shouts at his teammates. He has like no tolerance for mistakes. This sounds really toxic, but then you see, and they all talk about how it didn't feel toxic. It felt like driving. It pushed them to be better. It didn't let them get complacent. It was about consistency, not complacency. And I think this is something that maybe we're afraid to do in the same way in the business world, because like we talked about last week, you have that language that you can use in sports that doesn't always translate to like professional business, what we would normally say like professional business speak. Yeah. Right. And I think that maybe holds some people back, where people who do act that way in the business world, maybe they get dubbed the mean name that I won't repeat again. People don't want to work with them because they're pushing them and they're not easy to work with. And it's, there's always a problem. But I think would all agree that they still bring out the best in them. I think this is an area in business where if we could get teams to maybe it comes from that lack of trust in general, but if we could build to that place where you had more of those challengers on the team, I think it would be revolutionary in a lot of businesses.
Yeah, I'm curious what you guys think, right? And other people can hop in because in the high performing team, like Jordan wasn't trying to be friends with his teammates, right? In fact, he had very few friends on the Bulls. Most of his friends were on other teams or outside of basketball. And do we try and be do we have too many friendly relationships at work and not enough challenging relationships in a team dynamic that fails to push the team to that high performing level?
Well, let me challenge that real quick. Now, he may not have been. He was friendly with his teammates.
Friendly, yes, he was.
So, I mean, I don't know how often they hung out or, went different places, but it wasn't like the other show that I mentioned often.
Right.
They weren't friends. They weren't. They didn't hang out at all. But I think they were friendly with each other. I think today's society as a whole, the level of competition has changed, and we have to take that into account too.
Yeah.
When I was coming up in sports, my parents paid the money for me to play. I did not have to play. There was no rule that says I had to play. They paid the full amount, and I sat the bench. My kids, if I paid $150, it's by rule. They have to play a certain amount of innings. They have to play a certain amount of quarters. They got to get it at a certain amount of time. It is part of the rule. And now I've changed. I'm like, hey, put my kid in the game now because I paid my money. That's the same way society and business is too. We're not as competitive as we used to be. When I started out, my background was sales. And you better sell. And this push. Now it's like, well, we want.
Was it individual or team though, Marvin, in your sales space?
Overall, team. Because we were real competitive against each other. Who was number one in the region? Who was number one in the district? Are you hitting all your numbers? So we've changed quite a bit too, the level of competition. So when we talk about a high-performing team now, it's changed quite a bit because we don't have the same competition in business that we used to have. It was cutthroat. It was all those things, those bad terms that we don't use now. So that's something to consider.
Here's what I would say, and I would just toss this to the group. Think about your coworkers and your leadership. When is the last time you got an email, a phone call, a text to see how you're doing? You don't have to answer. Just think about that, right? So if we then go and criticize performance, bad performance, and we've set nothing else, then by that return, you're creating somewhat of a dysfunctional environment, right? Because again, we're in a different time. Back in the day, you could do that. Didn't care what people thought, didn't care what they wanted to do, didn't care about their social impact. It's not where we are today. We care about people. And so what I would tell you, the leaders that I have been around for many years, and many of you have been around leaders too, the ones, again, that have strong culture, low turnover, tenured people working there. There is a thing where I'm not over at your house every day, eating your food and all that, but I do care about you, right? And I had a boss once that I knew cared about me. And she told me, and believe this or not, I know you won't believe this, but back in the day, I wasn't the person that really wanted to go out and really meet with people and hang out with people, right? I was more on the phone. It was back in the day, I'm gonna date myself. We had fax machines and stuff like that. And she whispered in my ear and she said, you know what? She said, people really like you. You would be so more effective if you met with people in person. And it totally changed how I went about business because I thought, I'm great on the phone. I don't know how I'm going to do in person. I might be a hot mess in person. But because she said that, so the words do matter, the encouragement matters, and the leaders that understand how to approach each individual person on their team differently, because Michael knew how to approach certain people. He didn't really challenge Scottie Pippen the way he challenged Scott Burrell. So there's a way you have to figure out who in your organization can hear the harsh criticism and Marvin would respond. You could call Marvin an SOB and you're better than that, and you're just a loser. Marvin will take that and he will go knock it out the park. Somebody else would have a problem with that, right? And so you gotta understand, again, knowing the bench, how you communicate. You can't communicate just generally with everyone. It's gotta be individualized today versus what it was back in the day.
Well, let me throw this out because that ties into something Jason wrote, which is how do you know when to be the coach and when to put on the jersey in the business environment, right? Because it's not a clear cut always. And then the other thing I throw out, which relates to Jenna, are we exercising some bias because the Bulls were successful, right? So are we looking at everything Jordan did and saying, oh, that must be good because they won, and what would have happened if they wouldn't have, right? So I don't know. I throw that out to the group. I mean, Andre and Marvin can weigh in, but if other people kind of have opinions on when do you become the coach, and are we a little biased because we're looking backwards?
Jenna, you wrote it, so you respond. Let Jenna respond. Jenna, you wrote it, so let you respond.
Yeah, well, Natalie was talking about what she was saying, and it kind of just sparked that, like, okay, yeah, he was an asshole, but if we would have lost and he just kept pushing people like that, would it be different? If he didn't change up his strategy of how he pushed people, whether that be person to person or as the whole team, I think he would have had a very different narrative. If he kept that pushiness, that driver, that I'm going to make you better, okay, but were his teammates looking back and saying, oh, we're better because he's pushing us? And if they weren't getting better and they were losing and, had the worst history in the league, would they have been like, dude, get off me,
Yeah.
I think part of it, they would have just disappeared. There's been many of superstars who's pushed their team. They don't get a 10-part series. They just float away. They don't have six No, they don't. They don't have six championships, and we don't talk about them.
Yeah,
they're a non-issue. And that's
that,
part of it. I mean, do you know how many superstars, Hall of Famers, do not have one ring? He has 6. We just don't talk about them. Barkley doesn't have any rings. Malone doesn't have any rings.
Right.
I mean, Peyton. I mean, the list goes down to people who don't have any rings. And yes, there's a certain, when you demand more of people, Kobe's the same way. LeBron's a little bit the same way. Whenever you get these leaders, I think they push to get where they are. It doesn't just happen. It's not an individual sport. It's a team sport. So me as a leader, I have to get you going somewhere, somehow. And it can't always be pleasant. It can't be always, hey, Scott, are you okay today? No, Scott, get up and get going, dude. I don't have time for that. And you're like, well, I'm not feeling well. This is not a wellness visit. This is a get up off your butt visit and get it going. We need to get this done, Scott. That's not, like I said, it's a different era. It is a totally different era. And I have to call Scott. I have to check on Scott. Are you okay, Scott? My numbers are down. My sales are down. And he's in charge of my sales. And I have to check on so many things before I say, okay, do you think you can get to the sales, Scott? No, get to the sales right now. And that's the way it is. So I think the success gets talked about. Because of their success, you have to talk about it. And other ones who aren't successful in getting the rings and championship just fade away.
Yeah, I'm dying to jump in here real quick. So here's my take, and David had some comments too about types of leaders, and and we're not talking about when you're a leader, right? You're thriving, your culture's thriving, etc. There are also managers, right, that have never done a thing, but they want to tell you what to do. So first of all, you have no respect, you don't trust them, and all that goes out the way. So that comes across as what Jenna described as someone that might be an a-hole, right? I wouldn't qualify Michael as an a-hole for this reason. He was doing everything that he was asking people to do. And you can look in your organizations and think about the people that mentor you in a leadership perspective, because they had a track record, they had experience doing it, and they could guide you through it. But then think about the people that had no track record, no experience, and they were like, yeah, you should do this because you're just better than that. And they've never done it, right? There's a lot of managers that have never done it, but they have all the answers. So you have no respect for them. And so I would be okay with Michael, again, not the language doesn't translate into business, but I'd be okay with Michael in a team capacity, in an athletic field, because here's a man that's done every single thing he's asked you to do. And at the time, Steve Kerr and some of the other guys he already had won three rings, right? So you look at that, what has he done? Has he been successful? Yeah, I think he's been pretty successful. So if he's asking you to do certain things, I think he's got some trust. You may want to do it. You may not like the language, that he's using to get, but he's trying to get you to step up. And what good leaders will never do, they'll never come down to your level and play at that level, because they're high performers. And what they're trying to do is bring you up. And it's always a challenge to bring people up to your level, but it's always worth it because the outcomes are greater.
One thing that's interesting.
Jason makes a good point too between challenger and instigator, right? Like challengers are in the trenches with you. Instigators may be the type of leaders that David mentioned in his chat.
The ones that use the "it's not my job" description in my job description word and phrasing. I hate that.
Right.
Or command and control, but they aren't in the office with you, right? I've always thought it's useful as a leader to be there with your team when they're doing things off hours and things along those lines, and to be a part of that team member. But I still think that we'll continue to wrestle with, in a high performing team, when is it your time to coach and when is it your time to be a servant to the team? Because in a high performing team, different roles step up and perform leadership at different times, right?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, but I think when you talk about a high performing team and you talk about leadership, let's use other examples in the same realm, basketball. When you have the Lakers with Magic and you have Boston with Larry Bird, their roles as a leader was different. They had other leaders, they had other capable people on their teams. Right. Michael was the only one. You when you got Kareem and Worthy and other people on the Lakers, and you have on Boston's team, you have
McHale, Paris.
Thank you. And you have all those guys. Johnson on Boston. It's a different role. They have other people who can take the leadership this particular day. This particular day, it may be on Magic. Next day, it may be on. They have different role players for their team. For Michael and the Bulls, he was the only one. He was it. So when you talk about leadership on a team and the high performing and how it transcends, you have to understand who else is there, who else is in the room, who else is in the locker room. Michael didn't have anyone else. Those teams had better talent, had better leadership, and all the tools better than the Bulls had. The Bulls just had Michael Jordan.
Yeah. Jason, go ahead.
Jason, get in there. Jason wanted to get in.
I was just going to say, I think, using the sports analogy, the player coach analogy, and I made a comment on the chat and I'm going to revise it. I think it's a lot more fluid than trying to decide whether you hold a clipboard or you put on the jersey.
Yeah.
But because business is so fluid, rarely do you get the chance to just do one or the other. Generally, in the course of a day or a meeting, you're called on to play both roles. And I think high-performing teams are comprised of people that recognize that and are adaptable enough to understand what the instance or the circumstance calls for from them and what they need to do or say to get performance out of others. And, there was a mention earlier of being self-aware, and I think that's a skill set that is highly important and probably undervalued. And it's something that, you may not be able to teach. I think you can raise the awareness or raise, a person's self-awareness, but, the idea of being able to just be one or the other, I don't think any of us on this call get the luxury of doing that. And whether at business or at home, quite honestly. So.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jason. I think that, David asked a question about, do leaders lead from the back or, alongside, does a leader, all that, right? So I think, to me, most leaders' job are to create leaders within the environment. That's your job, and get out the way. You hire someone to do a job, let them do the job, coach them along the way, get out the way, let them do their work, right? So it is super important for any leader with any organization, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, and I sit on both, by the way. So I've helped shape cultures in nonprofit world. I've helped shape cultures in corporate world, right? So the ones that have done it effectively they have said to their employees, hey, what do you think we need to do to get better? What would be your ideas around that? Would you help lead that? So then what you've just done is giving access to someone to be able to step into a role and throw out their own ideas, again, being safe, right? And then the leader that asked that, he doesn't all of a sudden just take that. I go, yeah, I had a great idea in this meeting. And so they don't do, That's not a leader, by the way. That's a manager that would do something like that. Most leaders don't want the spotlight. They want to make their team better. And the job of any leader in any organization is to make their team. And here's the point. When Phil Jackson told Michael, we're going to take the ball out of your hands and we're going to start moving the ball around, you have to understand that conversation took place privately, but then it was communicated publicly because he wanted to get Michael on board with it because he didn't want the reaction to be felt towards his team and then create that. So Michael was already on board. And then Michael was like, yeah, so I'll dribble up and I'll pass it off the curve. Who'll hit the three? And then Dennis will hit the root. It's that. That's what great leaders do. They don't want the spotlight because if Michael did, he would have never been on board with the triangle offense.
Yeah, I remember talking to Leo Morton once, and I asked, he was giving his kind of take on what leadership was, and his view was his job was to help his teams identify their challenges and barriers, and his job as the leader was to remove those barriers for them so that they could perform.
Totally.
And I always took that to heart as a really good philosophy, right? It's almost like a servant leader model, right? He's not telling them what to do. He's helping them identify the barriers, and his job is to get them out.
Yeah, the bad leaders, Scott, they tell the team what they need instead of asking the team what they need.
Absolutely.
That's bad leaders.
But it takes that humility, right? It takes a lot of humility to not have to be the one who comes up with the answer and solution all the time.
Right. But I mean, you have to walk a thin line. You look for the leaders to lead. And sometimes, if I keep asking you, what do you think? What do you think? You're like, you're the leader. Tell us, help us. In many situations, they look for you to lead.
Sure.
But that's not the point. But here's the point, Marvin. Here's the point. You can do that, right? And I want to jump in because I think you're heading in a way that I think that's not what was meant. So if I'm leading a group of 20, right? And I go, hey, what do you guys think? We were trying to do this. I think we could take our product line this way. What do you think? And they go, hey, I think we could do this. Then you come back and you go, hey, I heard everything that you just said. This is what we're going to do. That's the leadership part of it, right? It's not, you're not letting them tell you. You're saying, I heard all your feedback. This is what I think we ought to do. In fact, this is what we're going to do. Great feedback. It allowed me to think through some things. Now I have everything. This is what we're going to launch. That's what the engagement's about because that's what the culture is about. And those that have high-performing cultures do that. Ones that have dictatorship-type cultures, they aren't high-performing. They might do well and they might perform, but what's their turnover like? What's the culture like? Are people dying to get out? Are you waiting till 5 and it's like 4:58 and you're by the elevator? Or are you seeing people there at 6:30 because they're super engaged?
No, but I think it depends on who's a part of that organization. That's the organizations, for the most part, that I've been a part of for many years. It has evolved and it has changed. But there was nothing wrong with drive. It's a different culture now. It's a totally different culture. If you go back to 1990, 1989, 87, that time in business, that's the way it was done. It was push. And it wasn't as open as it is now. This is a totally different culture. And I don't think people were anxious to get out. The competitors ones stayed in. They loved it. It was a great competitive environment, just like athletics to me. Now, it's a totally different thing. It's harder to compare the athletics to the business nowadays because there's such a separation. There's such, as we say now, ask everybody what they're feeling and touchy-feely. When sports still have a certain degree of high competitiveness, which sends you into a tailspin. So you have to look at the different. I don't think what we would say is a dictatorship. I wouldn't quite quote it that way. I don't think that could be unsuccessful either. It could be very successful. Not the best way in today's environment, but there's
that was my point. Yeah, that was my point. Back in the day of Jack Welch, where hey, you show up at 8 o'clock, take your lunch at noon, come back at 4 or at 1, work till 5, and do that Monday through Friday. Don't be late, or we'll get some that. That's the dictatorship side, which doesn't work in today's times.
Well, so go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say let's push this conversation into the breakouts a little bit. One of the things I think would be interesting is to talk about in the breakouts. What are people's different perspectives on high performing teams either they've been a part of, or things that or teams that weren't high performing, and what were the characteristics of those? And we'll do that in the breakouts, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Breaking away.
Break away.
Side chat, Andre, Julie.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it.
It's a great conversation. It really is. Man, I remember I've been around some. I used to work with a guy that I'd work like a 12-hour shift and come in the next morning, and this was when I was in retail. And I would be leaning on a counter, and he said, "Hey, if you got time to lean, you got time to clean up." And man, I just put in 12 hours, and I can't lean for a minute. So horrible boss. When I see him today, man, my fist balls up, and I just walk by him. I don't say anything to him.
All right, it looks like we're all back. So I'm going to with my room this time. I loved our conversation, not just because with Colette and my wife, but Gillian.
I'm so sorry, Gillian. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. God bless you. I'm praying for you. I am.
But we had two really interesting. Gillian talked about the gender piece, and then I'm going to let Colette women versus male leadership experiences.
Okay, you cut out a little bit. So you want me to talk about what?
Talk about the generational piece real quick, and then we'll talk about the male-female.
Okay, yeah. In my particular organization, I'm the CEO of Literacy KC, and I lead a team of 30 people who range anywhere from boomers to Gen Y and anything in between. And we have adult students in our classrooms who range from boomers to Gen Y. And so when you're talking about creating team dynamics, that can mean anything from our work teams, our programs team, our departmental team, so to speak, but also our classroom teams. And so we have to be able to overcome the generational differences to approaching things. And I think that, it is up to each person on the team to approach that, knowing, number one, what their talent and contribution to the team is going to be, but also number two, what their personality and work style is, so that they have a level of self-awareness moving into it, that, okay, this is how I approach things and this is how I work best. But then at the meta level, it's up to the leader to determine, to understand those two things about each person on his or her team, so that he or she can then draw out the level of greatness that they need in order to be to accomplish or reach the level of a high functioning and really dynamic team. And I think that intergenerational code switching, so to speak, is really, really important. And that can go for, when you talk about code switching, that can go for anything from multi-generational conversations to, gender, to any sort of norms that we talk about. What? Ethnicity, exactly. So yeah, anything that, anything that requires some level of code switching. And I think it's the leader's responsibility and really it's sort of our honor to be able to do that as well.
Totally.
It's awesome. Colette, do you want to do real quick on male versus female? And then I'll throw it out to Andre and Marvin to summarize.
Yeah. So I've had a long career. I won't say how old I am, but I've been around for a while. Been around the block. I've worked about 20 plus more years at Sprint, and my background is IT. So I was in a male majority culture dominated environment. IT is very goal oriented. So it felt very much like a Michael Jordan-ish type of leadership style that I was very used to. And so, a lot of the early part of my career, the leaders that I was reporting to or involved with, we were very goal oriented. We were very, let's get the job done. Let's get in here and get the job done. As years changed over and you started to see more females in leadership roles, there was kind of a period where you would think that, oh, it's going to be more accommodating because now I'm working with another female. But my experience during that time frame was the exact opposite, because most of those female leaders that got to those positions had to do that with their child on their hip and with, figuring out the daycare, figuring out the family situation, and be so dedicated to work in order to succeed that they look back at the other females, I think, in an effort to help them or build them up, but were a lot tougher on the females that were part of their leadership team. And then after kind of more women emerged into the workplace, and then you got more with different leadership styles, it just seemed like male leaders became more accommodating as well, because they understood you as a person and would try to make sure that they could get the best talent out of you and help you deal with any kind of situations you were working through. So it just there's a difference, I think, depending on what framework you're coming from. But I definitely noticed a difference in corporate, male, majority dominated culture leadership style versus I'm in nonprofit now and have been for several years, the female, more diverse leadership style. So I'll just stop there.
Great insights from both of you. Thank you. Andre, what do you?
Yeah, you've got a rooster in your head, but anyway, I don't know what that is back there, but that's okay. We'll figure that out later.
Paw Patrol.
We talked a lot in our group, and we didn't get a chance to hear from Michelle, but we talked a lot about just having how do you lead a group, right, with that kind of an attitude. And we talked about, if you've got experience and you've done it, then you're asking them to do the things that you've already done, right? And so it's that. And then what I would say to Colette too is, I think if you start looking at what corporate looks like now, like we built our company built out Mariner Wealth corporate headquarters. We actually put mothers' rooms in that corporate headquarters. So then you have an organizational at a leadership side saying, we know we're going to have women who are pregnant. We're going to accommodate that. And you can go to work, you can nurse, you can do your things. And so those leaders that are making it, so how are you, adjusting to the new times, right? And you have to have a dialogue with people when you have generational employees, right, that are different. You've got to talk to them, kind of like what Phil did with Dennis Rodman. Dennis has to go to Vegas. Well, if you hadn't told the team that this is why we're treating Dennis this way, we talked in our class that, hey, there's some resentment that happens, right? Because why is Dennis going to Vegas? I want to go to Vegas. Well, Dennis is a unique thing, and this is, so you've got to be able to understand that. Are you making things available to one but not all? And have you had dialogue around that? And then what does that create? What are the challenges that it creates in the environment if you are a little bit asleep at the wheel and you're doing that without forward communication? So we talked a lot. I would have loved to hear from Michelle, but she had some audio issues. So.
All right. Well, then why don't we go to Marvin?
All right. We had a great conversation. I will tell you that. Go through a few of the highlights. Jenna really talked about a high-performing team that she was a part of that lacked leadership. We were talking about that before. They just lacked leadership. They had the talent in the room, but they really lacked the leadership to really push them forward. That the leader was really a toxic leader, to be quite honest. But the talent and everything else was there. The leadership wasn't. Jason touched on, trying to be nice to you UMKC people, but he was saying that he participated in a high-performing team during his time at UMKC, but they had to fail to succeed. They weren't really successful at first, but they had to fail, kind of have some setbacks, and then they gathered themselves and moved forward. Natalie, and I wanted, for the sake of time, I wanted her to say something, but I'll just jump in for her. She was part of an all-women's team. And one of the things that she expressed is that she wished they had more diversity in the team. It was all women. She said it was all women. And she really had to work different. It was a different environment. And she said she just wished it would have been more diverse, meaning men, not just ethnicity or what have you, but just men. It would have been more diverse. David had a very interesting viewpoint.
Shocker.
He grew up Quaker. So they had
much love, David. Much love.
So they had quiet meetings.
I know that. Silent
meetings. And it's interesting how he, described the silent meetings where you can develop strength, you can see strengths of people and weaknesses of people, and had a chance to view that. But he ended on something very interesting. This dialogue, by design, was to talk about sports. It was to talk about Michael Jordan's documentary. And we're trying to bounce back and forth. But he expressed some of his corporate experience in law firms, and it happens in other corporations, not just law firms. Yep. But you have to drive the jock out of the conversation sometimes if you want to talk about business. And I agree with that. Being a past jock and talking in sports terms all the time, in order to have a nice conversation about business, you got to get the sports out of the room. You got to drive it out of the room. I know for this conversation, we're working with this, but I did agree with what he said, because it doesn't always translate. Sports, we always, in our mind, because we're sports guys, we can translate it, but it doesn't always translate as smooth. And so he said sometimes to have the good business conversation, you need to get the jock, not the jocks, the jock, the whatever out of the room. I thought that was awesome. And Dave, you can talk more about that if you'd like. I thought
David,
that was
jump
awesome.
in on that, Dave. I want to hear more about that, David. Jump in real quick.
Well, I think I'm trying really hard in my life at the moment to listen more and talk less, and it's really hard. But I've really done I know I've done a really good job so far, but I may blow it now. Okay, so I expounded that, and law firm. I mean, trying to manage lawyers is one of the most interesting things to do. Okay, so I shared that out of 24 partners, and I managed, quote unquote, the law firm for 13 years. I managed it by trying to do as little as possible myself and really push it back onto partners as owners to figure out, hey, what's my best role here? Some people got it, some people didn't. I'd have to coach them. But the point I was trying to make was that with 7 female partners out of the 24, I began to observe that none of them ever spoke up in the partners meeting. And I'm not saying that we were talking about sports, but it became very clear to me that what was going on was a quote unquote jock mentality. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean anything bad. Jocks, I mean, I remember in high school, jocks were, I mean, they were great. I mean, I was not a jock. Okay. I was an awful athlete. Now, I learned a lot. I was an awful team athlete. Okay. Mm-hmm. I ended up doing long distance cross country running. I mean, talk about isolating, but that's a whole separate deal. Okay. I was a great team member for myself, but so I spent time talking to the female partners on their own about, okay, I just need to understand, why aren't you speaking up in partners meetings? Now, they didn't say it as explicitly as jock, but it became very clear to me that there was a culture that I was not necessarily a part of. They said, hey, David, we're comfortable talking to you, okay? But if we said some things that were on our mind in a partners meetings, knowing how some of the partners really think, our careers would be damaged.
Wow.
Okay. And I'll give you one example. So yeah, we have lots of partners who were having babies, both female and male. Now, the males were not delivering the babies, but some of the younger males wanted FMLA. One of my older partners in a meeting, when I was sharing with the partnership that he had come into me very sheepishly to say, okay, my wife took 13 weeks. She's going back to work now. I'm going to take 13 weeks off. And I said, great, you should. Yeah. So as I announced that in the partners meeting, and this older partner, younger than me, but this older partner says, well, what a waste of time have we spent in cultivating him as an associate. Well, I looked at all the female partners in the room. I mean, if they could have killed him, they would. I had to go in and coach him afterwards to say, are you aware of what you just said? Right. He was oblivious, okay? Right. I mean, aside from the fact that we could get sued by what he said. Totally. But that betrayed the culture. So then next partners meeting, I said, hey, this is going to be painful, folks, but we have to have a conversation about this. Yeah. And I mean, I set it up. It was not a confirmation. Everybody sat there looking at their iPhones and you know, okay. But you got to force some of this stuff, and people just have to sit with some of this stuff sometimes. All right, enough.
So David, let me jump in real quick, Scott, before we end, because for folks who don't know David Oliver, he is magnificent at being able to take that conversation. He's also really good about being flexible and adapted, even at his old age, right? And I say that respectfully.
68, I'll show you my Medicare card.
Respectfully. So and we know law firms are notorious with male-dominated behavior and saying those things. So I'm seeing the women right now nod their heads. Hey, I'm with you. I'm nodding too, because we know that goes on. And so kudos to you, David, for calling that out and making that change. And they should have known as law firms, but lawyers have big egos, so they weren't worried about being sued.
Let's say one thing to kind of wrap into all of this. I think a lot of women really struggle with power, and I think that's something that's come from because a lot of women, even in emails, they've shown that women will use exclamation points or smiley faces more to seem nice. Because when we decide to assert our power and say something is going to be a certain way, a lot of the times we get called nasty words, and people can't take the women in power a lot of the time. And I think Colette and Gillian and April and I are all like, yeah, we've been there, we've done that. And the jock that David was talking about before isn't necessarily, I was a jock. I'm a huge jock. I can spit out more football knowledge than anybody really should. But the jock is the boys club. Like, what is a woman doing in here? You don't know what you're talking about, you know? And that's where I think a lot of the leadership of women comes into play, is that sometimes you don't want to speak up because then you're a nasty word because you challenged what's part of the boys club.
Well, and we need to have a conversation of who decided that white male is the default for a good person, okay?
Right.
Or, you know, in all honesty.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So David does a lot of work in the nonprofit world too, and diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm involved in that a little bit. Marvin's been involved in that, so that's even another topic. But you're absolutely right. I would like to think, and I'm not Pollyannish about this, I would like to think that those discussions aren't happening to anyone in this room anymore, because if they are, I'm saddened about that, because I had one of my best leaders that I was in front of was a woman. And the care that they take care of and being able to care for the people that are doing really good work and encouraging was always there. You don't always get that from a male leader. It's very rare. Women have this intuitiveness about them that they treat their people different. So I would hope to think that, those things aren't continuing on. But you're right, David, that, to think that that's the face of leadership is not in the progressive companies. It's not.
But I will tell you, just from my history in diversity and inclusion, those conversations continue.
Yes.
I mean, if that's not your environment, you talk, you don't know. I mean, and the sad part about it, some of those individuals that David's referring to, they mean no harm.
I know, they're oblivious.
They just don't know.
Oh, no, they are oblivious. And they get labeled. I mean, it's not better. I mean, intentional acts are worse than negligent acts. But if you can figure out that these people are just negligent, and they need to understand how their comments are deeply offensive in a way that is civil and encouraging to build a team, not to drive people apart.
Right.
Well, I think we're beginning to build an agenda for future conversations. I will tell you.
You identify your bias, because those biases that people don't even know they have.
Totally.
April, where are we in our slate of meetings? Did we have one more, or was this the last one?
I think we have one more.
There's one more.
There's one more. So the last one is, I should have been prepared.
It's all right.
I cannot remember off the top of my
head. I hope it's on culture and norms.
It's June 10th at noon. I signed up for it.
Correct.
It is June 10th at noon.
Yeah, it's coaching and motivating for peak performance.
That's it.
Right.
Yep.
Well, I think one of the things that we'll add to that is the continuation of this conversation, which is how do you coach in a way that is respectful and for different norms, and how do we bring in different philosophies into the coaching perspective that aren't just dominated by the Anglo male perspective. So
in a previous session, I know Jason had asked about wanting to be able to connect with people who had participated and conversation going. So we launched a complimentary group on LinkedIn called the Idea Salon, and we would love for you to join.
Love the name.
Link in the chat box. So check that out and hop on. You can start conversations there. You can join in on things that are already happening, but we'd love to have you.
As a professor, let me give you a little bit of homework. Anything that you want to post in there about coaching, from different perspectives. I'll post an article I use in my classes called Coaching Through Criticism. It's an HBR article, but if other people want to react or post other things in there,
oh, good.
That's what we want that for. Keep the conversation going.
Yes.
And April, will you send that link out to the people that had to hop off so they have that link too, that LinkedIn Idea Salon link too, and then any links you can send it out to the group that registered so they have it.
And it's a private group, so you can be a little more candid in there than you might be in other places on LinkedIn. So.
Good deal.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Hey,
thank you guys. Have a great week.
That was fun. See you
Be
guys.
safe.